Thank you for the introduction, Nalini. And as a startup, I think that I will go around the room and our facilitator for their summary. So hopefully, I will go through the order that I have on, on my list. So perhaps the first one is Miss Feli. Mrs. Feli? Yeah.
This topic is it's focused and unfocused. So it led to the first person talking about the difference in Italian immigrants in the 70s and the 30s and the views that they had. And I found that really interesting because Italian traditions are so very strong, and you see them so many times uh, in America. And this woman approached the fact that they're really very different values. The true Italian values are very different from the American adopted values. And I think that happens when you come to a country, you bring what you have, and then 30, 40 years later, you're doing things that are American plus, Italian American or Finnish American. So it was a really interesting view with that. Another person in the group was talking about just exploring her heritage and the limited view that was given, and yet now is a time with the cultural unrest, with the unrest in our country, is to explore your different connections with a variety of cultures. And so to say, well, who am I? And if you're raised with a lot of people of a certain view, and then but maybe I have different views. And so looking at that. And then Paolo was in my group, and so he brought in more information about Hawaii, which made me think about the fact that Hawaii is just a very different state for our country. It has a strong separate culture that, I mean, every state has its own culture, but this is very, very strong and very, very different, and worth a lot of exploration. So, and we went off on a few tangents too, but I appreciate being in the group and trying to, follow these different ways, and that, culture can become very strong within the environment that we're in, because you're looking for your identity and who you are, and what you can do personally to stand up for what you believe in, and to be very strong about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very nice. So I'm pretty sure that you had very active discussions. You're a very diverse group and opinions. Thank you. So next, I'd like to call for Dr. Clifton. You are muted, Dr. Clifton.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a great group where everyone was quite willing to share of their different experiences of their own cultures. And it was a wonderful mix. And then we were always trying to balance individual culture with being human. And that we, that maybe each cultures are different colors and have different stories to teach us. And we, if we can really learn. So we just really, celebrated the value of culture. There were two people in the group that one was starting a family imminently, a month away, and another person was going to have a family, and they were really exploring the idea of like, how much do I teach them about the different cultures. And it was really sort of universally agreed that, that we need to really let people experience that. There's a wisdom and strength that comes from the cultures, and there's, and there's always something to be learned. There was also talk about, a similarity that was very far away from Norway and the culture of Hawaii, but they were both water cultures, and they both seem to have a shared generosity of heart and a celebration of life. And so we can find these similarities. So it was an overall celebration of culture and a celebration of differences, and at the same time the sameness of being human. So a very good experience for me, and I hope everyone else in the group. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Clifton. I really like this, the balance and learning, and also I like the notion of the water culture, which is indeed several places in the world actually share similar experience, though that we do not seem to be related and connected in the first place, but perhaps our environment actually make us think alike. So next, I would like to call Natalie.
Thank you, Jerome. Our group had very good conversation. We had folks representing Northern Ireland, and we had Canadians, one, but what was very interesting in our discussion really was focusing in on culture. And one question we had, or someone made the comment that preserving culture and preserving humanity are two different things. But we paused and really said, perhaps we do need to preserve areas of culture to save humanity. There is evidence in Hawaii itself that blending some aspects of different cultures seems to give rise to a higher level of community, because there's better understanding and appreciation and respect. But then there were other things that were very troubling. There was a comment that, we Hawaiians refer to the United States as the mainland, right? And there are parallels between this tropical paradise and the mainland, and they're not necessarily positive. We are talking about the high incarceration rate. When you look at who is a native Hawaiian and who are the people who are incarcerated, there are issues with access to education, access to social services, and we also learned that there is a significant drug problem. That looks like where we are here too. So, there are some parallels in there, but maybe there is a common factor. So the difference between Hawaii and the United States, there are a lot of different cultures here, right? And so we do have people, as Mrs. Faley talked about, Italian Americans, and so they end up hyphenating the American at the end. But there is the different patches and different groups. In Hawaii, there is one group of people, and they have a cultural bond that really speaks to connecting with each other. We are one, we breathe the same, we are the same. And so their connection in terms of their culture is one of the heart and one of strength. Our cultures here speak to the way we dress and the clothes we wear and the food we cook. In Hawaii, food is food. It has no other labels. And so I reflect on what we can learn about the journey that culture can take us on. It can be very positive, where we can actually find that delicate balance and that way of respecting each other's culture. And so I may really come to love something about your culture and adapt it and incorporate it and express my appreciation of it the same way you would. And I have to be careful not to abuse it and not be disrespectful, and maybe ask a few questions so I really understand some of the background of your culture and practices and tradition. But culture does seem to be very important. In our room, one of our speakers says, yes, where I am, there is Britishness in the air, right? That gives you a different connotation. Okay, maybe that's not going so well, but the most difficult thing that we can do is ignore culture. I think we have to look for that delicate balance, that way of understanding people first, appreciating what they bring to the table, and connecting, and recognizing when people are using power in a negative way to either mute culture, abuse culture, and not tolerate it. You know, we are learning that to be silent is to be complicit. And not to respect others leads us down a very slippery path. And so as we look at culture and finding our way, we recognize that culture is in people. Culture makes people who they are, and it is truly important. The way we acknowledge it, the way we respect it, the way we allow it to influence us is very important.
Very nice. Thank you so much, Natalie. I guess now I'm going to call the last facilitator, Jérôme. Okay, so I had a very nice group, and we talked a lot of on a different theme. And the first one, I think, was about globalization. Which was also brought from our introduction speaker. And the globalization had somewhat started a little bit on a negative effect, perhaps, saying that, you know, oh, if we travel to Africa and we talk to the people, they know and they want to know all about American culture. So they end up to listening to Beyonce and look at American TV and American show, and they talk about American show, and the local cultures are a little bit faded away. So, and there was a similar feedback from perhaps, you know, a person from India saying that, you know, some people and from the youth, they start to abandon even learning to speak Hindi and just move on. You know, and just perhaps abandon the local specificity to embrace entirely the American culture. There was also a comment about the origin of the unrest, also that this caused this globalization. And the example that came up was the Hong Kong protest, where the people felt like, you know, China going back, controlling, is going to lead to their identity, their unique identity in a region, this, you know, experiment to some extent that has led to a unique identity and a unique freedom and a unique way of life, mobility and all of that. And people really feared that this would be lost. So there is a lot of those things, but then we also discussed that, you know, but globalization and the fact that whether you are from Africa living in the US and speak English and can go back and forth and share some culture, that could also have some positive effect to some extent. And in addition, you know, the being essentially in a position where you can, from the US, influence people and expose them to your own culture could also be seen as a positive aspect. So there is a kind of concept that there is a delicate balance there, right? It's like, in one sense, the culture comes along with you. In another sense, you know, everything starts to mix together and the boundaries are a little bit blurred, but you don't need to be essentially, because of course this notion of globalization came also with a notion of capitalism that I will touch base. But one of the conclusions was that you don't need to be, for example, capitalist or culturally sensitive. You can be both. And you know, we also heard this from Natalie, is like, you know, we have to also think about the people, and from other facilitator, we have to think about the people and integrate. But the other notion that we heard a lot is that you know, it's like what makes culture, and it's also the geographical location. It's also what surrounds us. It's also what suddenly assemble around us. And that's really the important part. So the origin is, of course, our geography and where we come from. But at the end, there is a certain fluidity in this cultural aspect. But what we share in common, as one of the people brought up, is really what makes us individual. It's a place where our heart is. It's the place where our breath is. Regardless of where we are in the world, we all breathe and we all have a heartbeat. And this, we have to keep that in mind, is that we are people. And if we are interested in basically sharing who we are as people, then perhaps there is indeed no tough call. We don't have to choose one or the other. We can live, be comfortable with who we are, where we are, and move with this kind of identity. But we also touch base this notion that a lot of places, and indeed there are differences between culture that have already a melting pot and culture that are very, very specific, right? That perhaps this notion that I heard that there are similarities between, you know, was it I don't know, it was Norway, I think, and Hawaii, because there's a culture of water, but the culture are very isolated. So, and suddenly there is some identity that is being built from the location. But at the same time, whether or not, you know, we are in a melting pot or in a very defined, we should perhaps work on our apprehension and try to focus on living that diversity and uniqueness, and that makes our culture. So perhaps as a closing statement for my session, I would say the beauty of the world lies in the diversity of its people, and that's what really enriched this topic. All right, so I think I summarized every facilitator because I thought I was the last, but Nalini, just correct me if I missed someone.